It was one of those quiet mornings that feel almost too perfect to be real. The kind where the air feels light, the sun hits the kitchen counter just right, and the smell of fresh coffee fills every corner. I remember Darren walking into the kitchen, his tie slightly crooked, his hair still damp from the shower. He smiled, the same smile I'd fallen for years ago, and said, "You're up early." He's spouting. I laughed, said something about Mason waking me at 6 again, and we moved around each other like we always did, two people who knew the rhythm of a shared life. On the outside, it looked like happiness. Inside, something had started to shift. Darren was quieter lately. The way he scrolled through his phone during breakfast, the quick glance he gave me when I walked in like he was making sure I hadn't seen something I wasn't supposed to. At first, I told myself it was work. He'd been stressed about the new project at Summit Ridge. Construction deadlines, budgets, the usual stuff. I'd been with him long enough to know he sometimes shut down when things got heavy. But this felt different. He wasn't just tired. He was elsewhere. Still, I pushed the thought aside. We'd been together for 12 years. Everyone goes through rough patches. You don't start doubting the man who shared your bed for over a decade just because he forgets to say good morning. Pambling. That's what I told myself that day. I poured his coffee, handed him his travel mug, and kissed him on the cheek. His skin was cold. He said, "See you tonight," grabbed his keys, and left. The house went quiet again. Just me, Mason's toys scattered on the floor, and the hum of the Nanny cam sitting on the bookshelf, something I barely noticed anymore. I'd bought it 2 years ago when Mason was still a toddler, mostly to check on him when I was at work. It had become part of the furniture, like the clock or the family photos. I didn't know then that little camera would become the reason my entire world fell apart. Around 8, I got Mason ready for preschool. He kept asking why Daddy didn't eat breakfast with us anymore. I told him Daddy had big boy work. He nodded like he understood, but I could tell he didn't. Kids feel things before they understand them. As I strapped him into his car seat, I looked back at the house. It stood there clean, calm, normal. Everything in its place. Nothing to hint that something was breaking right under the surface. At work, the day dragged. Numbers blurred together, spreadsheets, meetings, phone calls. I liked the order of it all. Numbers didn't lie, people did. Around lunchtime, I texted Darren, just a simple, "How's your day?" No reply. 2 hours later, another. "Dinner tonight." Thinking pasta. Still nothing. By the time I got home, Mason had fallen asleep in the car. Darren's car wasn't in the driveway. A post-it on the fridge said, "Late meeting. Don't wait up." I stared at the note longer than I should have. The handwriting looked rushed, like an afterthought. That was when the first real thought crept in, the one I'd been avoiding for weeks. What if it's not work? I pushed it away again. I had bills to pay, a child to feed, laundry to fold. Real life doesn't pause for suspicion. That night, after Mason was in bed, I sat on the couch with the TV on but not really watching. The Nanny cam's small green light blinked from across the room, a quiet, steady pulse in the dark. It was a normal night in every way, and yet, something about that light made me uneasy. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the part of me that already knew the truth but wasn't ready to say it out loud. Either way, I remember glancing at it and thinking, funny how something so small can see everything. Then I shook the thought off, turned off the TV, and went to bed alone. After the most emotional beat, the reflection on the Nanny cam light. If you've ever felt that quiet suspicion, the one that whispers something isn't right, tell me below. Have you ever ignored your gut because love told you not to look too closely? Leave a comment, and if you like true cheating stories plus revenge stories that hit close to home, don't forget to subscribe for more. Scene ends naturally, no closure cue, only quiet continuation of life. The next morning began the same way. Coffee, silence, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was one of those quiet mornings that feel almost too perfect to be real. The kind where the air feels light, the sun hits the kitchen counter just right, and the smell of fresh coffee fills every corner. I remember Darren walking into the kitchen, his tie slightly crooked, his hair still damp from the shower. He smiled, the same smile I'd fallen for years ago, and said, "You're up early." I laughed, said something about Mason waking me at 6 again, and we moved around each other like we always did, two people who knew the rhythm of a shared life. On the outside, it looked like happiness. Inside, something had started to shift. Darren was quieter lately. The way he scrolled through his phone during breakfast, the quick glance he gave me when I walked in like he was making sure I hadn't seen something I wasn't supposed to. At first, I told myself it was work. He'd been stressed about the new project at Summit Ridge, construction deadlines, budgets, the usual stuff. I'd been with him long enough to know he sometimes shut down when things got heavy. But this felt different. He wasn't just tired. He was elsewhere. Still, I pushed the thought aside. We'd been together for 12 years. Everyone goes through rough patches. You don't start doubting the man who's shared your bed for over a decade just because he forgets to say good morning. That's what I told myself that day. I poured his coffee, handed him his travel mug, and kissed him on the cheek. His skin was cold. He said, "See you tonight," grabbed his keys, and left. The house went quiet again. Just me, Mason's toys scattered on the floor, and the hum of the nanny cam sitting on the bookshelf, something I barely noticed anymore. I'd bought it 2 years ago when Mason was still a toddler, mostly to check on him when I was at work. It had become part of the furniture, like the clock or the family photos. I didn't know then that little camera would become the reason my entire world fell apart. Around 8, I got Mason ready for preschool. He kept asking why Daddy didn't eat breakfast with us anymore. I told him Daddy had big boy work. He nodded like he understood, but I could tell he didn't. Kids feel things before they understand them. As I strapped him into his car seat, I looked back at the house. It stood there clean, calm, normal. Everything in its place. Nothing to hint that something was breaking right under the surface. At work, the day dragged. Numbers blurred together, spreadsheets, meetings, phone calls. I liked the order of it all. Numbers didn't lie. People did. Around lunchtime, I texted Darren, just a simple, "How's your day?" No reply. 2 hours later, another, "Dinner tonight?" Thinking pasta. Still nothing. By the time I got home, Mason had fallen asleep in the car. Darren's car wasn't in the driveway. A post-it on the fridge said, "Late meeting, don't wait up." I stared at the note longer than I should have. The handwriting looked rushed, like an afterthought. That was when the first real thought crept in, the one I'd been avoiding for weeks. What if it's not work? I pushed it away again. I had bills to pay, a child to feed, laundry to fold. Real life doesn't pause for suspicion. That night, after Mason was in bed, I sat on the couch with the TV on but not really watching. The nanny cam's small green light blinked from across the room, a quiet, steady pulse in the dark. It was a normal night in every way, and yet, something about that light made me uneasy. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the part of me that already knew the truth but wasn't ready to say it out loud. Either way, I remember glancing at it and thinking, funny how something so small can see everything. Then I shook the thought off, turned off the TV, and went to bed alone. After the most emotional beat, the reflection on the nanny cam light. If you've ever felt that quiet suspicion, the one that whispers something isn't right, tell me below. Have you ever ignored your gut because love told you not to look too closely? Leave a comment, and if you like true cheating stories, plus revenge stories that hit close to home, don't forget to subscribe for more. Scene ends naturally, no closure cue, only quiet continuation of life. The next morning began the same way. Coffee, silence, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window, cutting across the counter where Darren's coffee cup still sat half empty, a ring of brown on white porcelain. I rinsed it without thinking, the sound of running water covering up everything I didn't want to feel. Mason tugged on my sleeve, asking if I'd packed his toy dinosaur for preschool. I smiled and said yes, even though my head felt far away. I was running late, trying to finish breakfast dishes and answer a work email at the same time. Darren had already left a quick kiss, a distracted "love you" on his way out the door. As I reached for my bag, I noticed the little green light on the nanny cam blinking steadily from the shelf near the TV. I usually turned it off before leaving, but Mason was fussy and I was late. I figured, what harm could it do if I left it on for one day? I grabbed my keys, buckled Mason in, and drove off, the thought gone as quickly as it came. At work, everything felt ordinary: emails, reports, the low hum of office chatter. I liked that kind of noise. It made life predictable. Around noon, I took my lunch outside, sitting in my car where it was quiet. That's when my phone buzzed. A push notification. Motion detected. Living room, 12:04 p.m. My first thought was Mason. Maybe Darren came home early to grab something. I opened the Nanny Cam app casually, expecting to see the living room empty, or maybe our cat walking across the couch. But what I saw made my stomach drop. The camera's wide-angle lens showed the front door opening. Darren stepped inside, keys jingling, jacket slung over his arm. Behind him, a woman followed, blonde hair, mid-30s, dressed in office clothes that didn't look like she was there to babysit anyone's child. He laughed. She touched his shoulder. He didn't move away. They walked into the living room, right where Mason's toys were scattered on the rug. Darren said something I couldn't hear, then leaned closer. She smiled, tilting her head. My fingers froze on the phone screen. Then he kissed her. Not a quick, guilty kiss. The kind of kiss that comes from practice. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The video feed kept playing, but I couldn't look anymore. I locked my phone screen and just stared at the steering wheel, trying to breathe. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes. 10, maybe more. The world felt muffled, like I was underwater. Cars passed, birds chirped, a plane moved across the blue sky above me, and none of it seemed real. When I finally looked again, they were gone from the frame. The living room was empty, still, like nothing had happened. Except everything had. I didn't cry. Not right away. The tears came later, soft, silent ones that left salt on my lips but no sound in the air. I wanted to tell myself there was an explanation. Maybe she was a friend, a coworker. Maybe I didn't see what I thought I saw. But the truth doesn't leave room for maybe. At 12:42 p.m., another motion alert popped up. They came back into view, laughing, straightening their clothes. Darren picked up a toy car from the floor, Mason's favorite, and said something that made her laugh again. Then they left together. I closed the app. I couldn't breathe in that car anymore. The rest of the day passed like a fog. I went back into the office, smiled at coworkers, sent emails, even answered a client call. I spoke like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just watched my marriage crumble on a 4-inch screen. By the time I picked Mason up from preschool, I'd rehearsed every possible explanation, all of them lies I told myself to survive the drive home. That evening, Darren came through the door at 7:30, just like always. He smiled, kissed Mason on the head, and asked what was for dinner. He didn't know I'd seen everything. He didn't know that every word, every smile, every movement he made now existed on a video I couldn't unsee. Long day? He asked me. Yeah, I said, just tired. He nodded, poured himself a drink, and turned on the TV. The same couch, the same room, the same space where hours ago he'd betrayed everything we built. As I watched him sit there, laughing at some stupid commercial, I felt the strangest thing, not rage, not heartbreak, not yet. Just distance. Like he was already a stranger, and I was only realizing it now. Later that night, when he went to bed, I opened the Nanny Cam app again. The saved footage sat there quietly, time-stamped and labeled, Living Room, 12:04 p.m. I pressed play once more, needing to be sure I wasn't imagining it. There it was, the laughter, the touch, the kiss. It wasn't a dream. I saved the video, uploaded a backup to my private cloud drive, and locked my phone. Then I stood in the dark living room, staring at that little blinking green light, the same one I'd ignored every day. It blinked once, twice. A steady heartbeat in the shadows. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kiss replaying over and over. And somewhere in between the pain and disbelief, a quiet thought formed in my mind, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. He thinks I don't know. The house was still. The Nanny Cam light blinked again, a silent witness to everything. And for the first time, I didn't look away. When the sun came up the next morning, everything looked the same, the walls, the kitchen, the sound of Mason's cartoons playing in the background, but I didn't feel like I lived there anymore. Darren was making pancakes, humming softly, like he hadn't destroyed something sacred 24 hours earlier. He glanced at me and smiled. "You're quiet today." "I didn't sleep much," I said, reaching for a mug. He nodded, as if that explained everything, and flipped another pancake. The smell of butter and syrup filled the air, the same smell that used to mean family. Now it just made my stomach twist. I watched him move around the kitchen, laughing with Mason, acting like the man I used to know. My brain was screaming, "You liar," but my lips stayed shut. He had no idea what I'd seen. No idea I'd watched him hold another woman in this same kitchen, touch her face with hands that now poured syrup for our son. It's strange the body learns how to fake calm faster than the mind does. My hands moved, my voice worked, but inside I was somewhere else entirely. I wondered if the woman he kissed knew this kitchen, if she knew about Mason's drawings on the fridge or the dent in the counter where Darren dropped a hammer last year. Maybe she didn't care. When he left for work, I stood by the window and watched his car back out of the driveway. He didn't look up once. The house was too quiet. I opened the Nanny Cam app again, like someone touching a bruise just to see if it still hurts. The footage played, and I felt the same punch in my stomach as yesterday. I could hear the faint sound of laughter through the audio feed. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I paused the video at the moment he kissed her. His hand was on her waist, her face turned toward him, their bodies framed perfectly in that living room, our living room. The clock behind them read 12:04. That timestamp burned into my mind like a scar. I sat there for a long time, numb. Then I copied the footage to a flash drive. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was survival. That evening, Darren texted that he'd be working late again. The words didn't hurt like they used to. They just sounded hollow now, predictable. I heated up leftovers for Mason, helped him brush his teeth, tucked him into bed. When I kissed his forehead, he mumbled sleepily, "Night, Mommy. Night, Daddy." Embers. My chest tightened. "Night, baby," I whispered, my voice breaking halfway. Downstairs, I sat on the couch with the Nanny Cam remote in my hand. The green light blinked once, twice, steady. I looked around the room and tried to picture it without the lies. How many times had he sat on this couch and texted her? How many nights had I been asleep upstairs while he planned his next excuse? I thought about calling Tanya, but it was late. And besides, what would I say? "Hey, I caught my husband cheating on our Nanny Cam. What do I do now?" There's no script for this kind of thing. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, took one sip, and put it down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wanted to confront him, to scream, throw something, make him look me in the eyes, and tell me why. But some part of me already knew screaming wouldn't fix anything. Men like Darren don't confess. They minimize, they twist. They make you question your own eyes. So I decided not to give him that power. When he finally came home past 11, he smelled faintly of the same floral perfume I'd noticed before. He smiled like everything was fine, kissed me goodnight, and climbed into bed beside me. I lay still, my eyes open in the dark, listening to the sound of his breathing. At some point, I realized I was holding my breath, afraid that if I exhaled too loud, he'd hear how broken I'd become. He turned toward me, half asleep. "You okay?" he mumbled. "Yeah," I whispered. "Just tired." The word tired felt too small for what I was. A few days passed, like that ordinary days carrying extraordinary pain. He went to work. I went to work. We pretended life was normal. But I stopped believing his stories about late meetings. I stopped believing in the man who came home smelling like someone else's perfume. One night, while Mason slept, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open and searched for Colorado divorce lawyer. The screen filled with results. I didn't click any of them yet. I just stared, letting the reality sink in. I wasn't ready to blow up my life. Not yet. But I also knew something had ended the moment that Nanny Cam light blinked. Darren had always said trust was everything. Once it's gone, he told me once, there's no getting it back. Do. I wondered if he remembered saying that. Before bed, I went downstairs one last time to check the doors. The house was dark, except for the faint green glow from the camera. I stood there, watching that tiny light blink like a pulse in the shadows. It was strange how something so small could see everything, and how one ordinary day could divide a life cleanly in two, before you know the truth, and after you've seen it. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs quietly, leaving that little camera blinking in the dark, recording nothing but the sound of an empty room and the faint echo of everything that used to be love. The air in the house had changed. It wasn't something you could see, but you could feel it, the heaviness, the echo of silence between words. Darren still kissed me goodbye every morning, still texted me at lunch, still played the part of a husband. But once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. Every gesture turns into evidence. I started noticing everything. His voice when he lied, too calm, too measured. The way he left his phone screen face down on the table. The scent of a woman's perfume that wasn't mine lingering faintly on his jacket. It didn't make me cry anymore. It made me alert. It's strange how grief can make you sharper. My sadness had turned into something colder, more deliberate. That's when I decided I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I'd learned enough from watching the nanny cam to understand what happens when you show your cards too soon. I wanted proof. I wanted control. One Friday afternoon, when he said he was staying late again, I logged into the nanny cam remotely. The house was empty at first. Then the feed flickered, showing the front door. Darren walked in, alone. He set down his briefcase, loosened his tie, poured himself a drink. He looked comfortable, too comfortable for a man who was supposedly working overtime. I watched as he paced around, made a phone call, and smiled one of those small, private smiles that you only give to someone who isn't your wife. He said, "Yeah, I miss you too." Then laughter, then silence. I saved the footage, my hands steady. There was no shaking this time. That night, he came home and kissed me like always. I kissed him back. I think part of me wanted to see how long I could live inside a lie. After Mason fell asleep, I sat in bed beside him, scrolling through the footage again. I didn't watch the kiss. I didn't need to. I was watching myself now, the woman sitting next to him, pretending she didn't know. The next morning, I called Tanya. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. "I need a good family lawyer," I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Do you want to end it?" "I don't know," I whispered, "but I need to be ready if I do." That afternoon, while Darren took Mason to the park, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. What I have: video footage, timestamps, 12:04 p.m. and 12:40, 2 p.m. Credit card receipts, restaurants and hotels. His work emails, suspiciously deleted every few days. What I need: legal advice, separate bank account, strength. I opened my laptop and searched for divorce lawyer, Boulder, Colorado. The name Cynthia Hale came up, an old college friend who'd become an attorney. I stared at her photo for a minute before sending a short message. "Hi Cynthia, it's Elena Brooks. I might need your help with something personal." When I hit send, my heart didn't race. It just felt heavy, like I'd stepped onto a path that had been waiting for me all along. That night, Darren came home earlier than usual. He brought dinner takeout from a Thai place we used to love. He set the table, poured wine, asked about my day. It was almost believable. Almost. At one point, I excused myself to the bathroom. His phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it just once. A text preview from Kelly. It read, "I missed last night already." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. When I returned to the table, I smiled and said, "Dinner's good. Omen." He smiled back, relieved, completely unaware that his world was already shifting under him. Later, after he fell asleep, I logged into our joint bank account. He'd transferred $600 to a personal card I didn't recognize. I made a quiet note of it in a password-protected file titled Budget 2025. I wasn't angry anymore. I was methodical. The next morning, I met with Cynthia at a small cafe downtown. She still had the same confident, steady presence I remembered from college. She didn't ask for details right away. She just listened. When I finally told her, she didn't look shocked. She'd heard it all before. But when I mentioned the nanny cam, she leaned forward. "That's powerful evidence," she said. As long as you didn't record audio without consent, it's admissible. I nodded. It's all video. No sound. Good. Then keep everything. Dates, files, backups, and don't let him know what you have. Not yet. I asked her what my options were. She explained the process, how Colorado handled no-fault divorces, asset division, custody. It sounded clean, almost businesslike. But divorce isn't business. It's bloodless war. When I got home, Darren was mowing the lawn. He waved at me, sweat glistening on his forehead, looking like any other suburban husband. I waved back, hiding everything behind a calm face. Inside, I started another list. Rules. 1. Don't confront. 2. Don't react. 3. Don't lose focus. I wasn't ready to leave yet. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I wanted to leave right. I wanted to walk out with my dignity, my son, and everything he thought I couldn't handle on my own. That night, while folding Mason's clothes, I thought about how easily betrayal hides in normal life. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It smiles. It tucks your child into bed. Darren came in, kissed the top of my head, and said, "You okay?" I turned, smiled softly. "Yeah, I'm good." He kissed me goodnight and went to bed. I stayed up a little longer, sitting in the quiet house, the hum of the fridge the only sound. The nanny cam light blinked in the dark again, steady and small, like a heartbeat that never lies. I looked at it for a long moment before turning off the lights. Some truths don't need to be spoken out loud, they just need to be remembered. The hum of the garage door opening used to make me feel safe. It meant Darren was home, that the day was done, that our family was together again. Now, it just made my stomach tighten. Every sound, every routine gesture, felt suspicious once you knew what to listen for. He came in whistling that evening, a takeout bag in one hand, his phone in the other. "Hey, I picked up Chinese," he said, his tone light, as if the last few weeks hadn't felt like I was living next to a stranger. I smiled, maybe too politely. "Nice. Mason will be happy." He set the food down on the counter, his phone screen lighting up with a quick buzz. He glanced at it, locked it, and slid it into his pocket in one practiced motion. I caught the name before it disappeared. Kelly H. I turned back to the plates, acting as if I hadn't seen it. Pretending had become muscle memory. We ate dinner like a normal family. Mason told us about a painting he'd made in preschool. Darren nodded like a proud father, and I watched his wedding ring glint under the kitchen light. A circle of gold, spotless, meaningless. After dinner, Darren offered to clean up. I let him. It gave me an excuse to go upstairs, close the bedroom door, and finally breathe. I sat on the bed, unlocked my phone, and opened the folder where I'd been keeping everything: the screenshots, the receipts, the nanny cam footage. Each file was a heartbeat of proof. Together they told the story he was still too arrogant to admit. But something inside me wasn't satisfied. Proof wasn't enough. I wanted to understand the pattern, the days, the times, the lies he'd rehearsed until they sounded like truth. So I started watching. Not just the camera his timing, his tone, the rhythm of deceit, the way he said contractor meetings on Wednesdays, the way he took extra long lunch breaks on Fridays. A week later, I caught another clue by accident. I was organizing bills in the office when I noticed a folded hotel receipt tucked between Mason's art papers. The logo said the Lakeview Inn, dated the same day Darren claimed he was in Denver for a conference. The charge: 2 guests, king room. I stood there, holding that slip of paper like it was burning. Then I slid it into my folder of evidence. That evening, while he was in the shower, I heard his phone vibrate on the dresser. A message preview flashed before it locked again. "Kelly, same place tomorrow?" My breath caught. I picked up his phone for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of it in my hand, the tiny device that held all the lies he'd built our life around. But I didn't unlock it. I didn't need to. When he came out of the shower, I was brushing my hair, pretending nothing had changed. He smiled, kissed my shoulder, and said, "I'll be late tomorrow. Big client thing." "Of course," I replied, watching his reflection in the mirror. His eyes met mine, just for a second too long, like he could sense something behind the calm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to his breathing beside me. Even, steady, peaceful. My mind kept looping through every moment of our marriage, searching for where the cracks began. Maybe it was when Mason was born, when our lives started revolving around diapers and doctor visits instead of late-night movies and long drives. Maybe it was when I got promoted and started earning more than him. Maybe it was always there, just waiting for the right lie to set it free. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went downstairs. The nanny cam's tiny green light glowed in the dark. I unplugged it, wiped the lens with a tissue, and then plugged it back in. Not because I needed to record him again, but because I wanted control over what saw us. The camera didn't lie, but it also didn't protect. The next day, I decided to test him. When he came down for breakfast, I smiled and said, "Hey, I'm off early today. Maybe we can grab lunch together?" His face flickered just for a second, but it was enough. I've got a site visit with the team. Might run late," he said, sipping his coffee too quickly. "Right." I nodded. "You've been so busy lately." He kissed my cheek, the same practiced motion, and left. After dropping Mason at preschool, I drove nowhere in particular, just far enough to think. The world outside felt normal. People walking dogs, kids waiting for the bus, a woman jogging with earbuds in, all of them living lives that hadn't been cracked open by betrayal. I parked near a coffee shop and stared out the window. The truth of it all sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't move. I wasn't crying anymore. The tears had burned out, replaced by something harder: clarity. That afternoon, I went back home and checked the camera feed. Nothing. He hadn't come home. But a few hours later, my phone pinged with a new email notification: his bank alert. A $146 charge at the Lakeview Inn. There it was again. Same hotel, same lie. I took a screenshot, uploaded it to my folder, and closed the laptop. The house was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of detergent and betrayal. When Darren came home that night, he looked exhausted, almost proud of how believable he thought he was. "Long day," he said, taking off his jacket. I smiled, setting a plate on the table. "You deserve a break." He kissed me on the forehead, murmured, "Don't know what I'd do without you." The words rolled off him like a habit. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't the man I married anymore. He was the lie I'd been living with. As he turned away, I caught a faint trace of perfume again. Sweet, expensive, wrong. The sound of Mason's laughter from upstairs echoed softly through the hall, pure and unknowing. I stood there, between the two sounds, the laughter of innocence and the scent of deceit, and made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't going to lose to a lie. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. The nanny cam light blinked in the corner, and I finally understood that quiet wasn't weakness, it was preparation. The hardest part of betrayal isn't the moment you find out, it's the days that follow, when you still have to act like nothing's wrong. When you smile at the man who broke your heart because you need time to plan your exit. I became good at pretending. Too good, maybe. Each morning I brewed coffee, packed Mason's lunch, and kissed Darren goodbye like it was any other weekday. I matched his rhythm, mirrored his tone, laughed at the right moments. To anyone watching, we looked fine. But every move had purpose now. Every conversation was a test. When Darren left for work, I checked our shared accounts, tracking every unfamiliar expense. Lunches for two, hotel stays, gas receipts in towns he'd never mentioned. I copied everything. Not for revenge, not yet, but because information meant power. At night, after Mason was asleep, I'd scroll through the folder on my laptop. Photos, timestamps, transactions, messages. Each piece fit into a puzzle that no longer hurt to look at, it just made sense now. I was done asking why. I was learning how. One Saturday morning, Darren suggested a family outing. We could drive up to Estes Park, have lunch by the lake, he said, smiling like he'd just invented the idea of family. I agreed. I always agreed. The drive was long and quiet. Mason chattered in the back seat, pointing at clouds that looked like animals. Darren kept one hand on the wheel, the other scrolling through music on his phone. I watched his reflection in the window, the same easy grin, the same calm tone. It was almost peaceful, until a notification flashed on his screen. I only caught one word before he swiped it away. Miss. He turned to me, too fast. What? I hadn't said a thing. I just smiled, like I hadn't seen it. At lunch, I watched him talk to Mason, his voice warm, his laughter easy. He looked like a good father. And maybe that was the cruelest part, knowing that people can love their children and still betray their spouse without flinching. That night, after Mason went to bed, I opened the folder again and renamed it Household Records, just in case he ever borrowed my laptop. I had become someone else, not the naive wife, not the woman begging for the truth. I was the quiet one taking notes, waiting for the right moment. It's strange how strength feels when it finally arrives. It doesn't come with a scream. It comes in small decisions, staying silent, saving evidence, smiling at a liar until the day you don't have to anymore. I began preparing for that day in secret. First, I opened a separate bank account under my maiden name. Small deposits each week, money from freelance projects, tax refunds, cashback rewards, anything I could hide without drawing attention. Second, I found a rental listing through a coworker. A modest 2-bedroom apartment near Mason's preschool. I didn't sign anything yet. I just needed to know there was a door waiting to open when I was ready to walk through it. And third, I met with Cynthia again. She looked over my folder of evidence and nodded. "You've done everything right," she said. "The more he believes things are normal, the better your position will be when you file." I asked, "How do women do this? Live with someone they don't trust?" Cynthia looked at me and said, "Because they're smarter than the people who betrayed them." That line stayed with me. Back home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied my reflection. My face looked the same, but something behind my eyes had changed. I wasn't scared anymore. Darren came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You've been distant lately," he said softly. "Everything okay?" I met his gaze in the mirror. "Of course," I said. "Just tired." He kissed my shoulder, completely unaware of how hollow that moment had become. A week later, I noticed something odd. He'd stopped being careful. Maybe he thought I'd stopped paying attention. Maybe he thought his performance was still working. He started leaving his phone on the counter again, his messages open when he went to the shower. That's when I saw it, an exchange between him and Kelly. Kelly, "Same hotel Friday?" Darren, "Wouldn't miss it. You make everything worth it." The words didn't even sting this time. They just confirmed what I already knew. I saved screenshots, deleted my browsing history, and tucked Mason into bed early that night. As I turned off the lights, I stood at the doorway watching my son sleep, his tiny hand curled around a stuffed dinosaur. I thought about the future, the one I was building quietly, piece by piece. A future where he wouldn't grow up watching his mother pretend she was okay. Downstairs, Darren was on the couch, watching TV, laughing at something loud and stupid. I looked at him, the man I used to love, and realized he'd already left me long before I decided to leave him. The silence in that room wasn't emptiness anymore, it was control. I poured myself a glass of water and stood near the window. Outside, the neighborhood was calm, porch lights flickering, a dog barking in the distance, wind moving gently through the trees. Ordinary life. Mine was about to stop being ordinary. I turned off the nanny cam that night, not because I didn't need it anymore, but because I'd already seen enough. He thought I was still blind. He thought I was still the wife who waited up, who trusted. But the truth was simpler, sharper. I was just waiting for him to walk himself into his own ending, and when he did, I'd be ready, and I'd be free. The morning began like every other, the smell of coffee, the quiet shuffle of Mason's little feet on the hardwood floor, Darren humming off, key in the kitchen. Everything looked ordinary, but there was a kind of clarity that comes only when you've stopped lying to yourself. I wasn't suspicious anymore. I was certain. I just hadn't decided how to act on it yet. He wore that same calm smile as he buttoned his shirt. "Big day today," he said. "We've got a presentation with investors. Might be home late again." I nodded, pouring his coffee like always. "Good luck," I said, and meant it. The sooner he felt comfortable, the sooner he'd make a mistake. He left around 7:30, kissing me on the cheek, the same gentle routine he'd perfected over months of deceit. I watched his car pull out of the driveway, taillights fading down the street. The moment the garage door shut, I opened my laptop. The folder of evidence was already waiting on my desktop. Video, receipts, texts, everything lined up like a case file. But something still bothered me. Something about the gaps between his late nights and his business trips. There were days when there was no charge, no hotel receipt, no message, just silence. And silence always hides something. I remembered that the Lakeview Inn had an online reservation system. Out of curiosity or maybe instinct, I searched his email inbox for Lakeview. The results hit instantly. Confirmation Hasson 7456 Kelly Harris paid in full. My hand froze on the trackpad. The reservation wasn't under his name. It was hers. She'd booked the room. He'd just shown up. That was when I realized this wasn't just an affair. It was a pattern, planned and practiced. I forwarded the email to my private account, then deleted the evidence of my search. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It beat slow and steady, like it finally understood its own purpose. Later that afternoon, I decided to take Mason to my sister's house. Just for the weekend, I told Darren over text. He misses his cousins. He replied almost immediately, "Sure thing, I've got some work stuff anyway." Perfect. When I dropped Mason off, I hugged him tighter than usual. He didn't notice anything, just smiled and ran off to play. On the drive back, the quiet in the car felt different, not heavy like before, but focused. I wasn't heading home right away. I parked a few blocks from the Lakeview Inn. It wasn't far from Darren's office, quaint, surrounded by tall pines, the kind of place couples booked for romantic getaways. I waited. No shaking hands this time. Just stillness. At 6:12 p.m., his car turned into the lot. He didn't see me. He parked near the back entrance and sat for a moment, checking his phone. Then, the passenger door opened. Kelly stepped out from her car, her hair perfectly done, her smile too easy. They walked inside together. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The truth had already arrived. I sat there watching the sky dim, the colors shifting from gold to blue to the dark of certainty. It was strange, feeling peace in the exact place where your heart should break. At 7:41, they came out. His hand brushed her back as they laughed. She kissed him on the cheek before getting into her car. He stood there, watching her drive away, then glanced around the lot careful, but not careful enough, and left in the opposite direction. When he turned the corner, I started my engine and drove home. Inside the house, everything looked the same. Toys in the living room, mail on the counter, the faint glow of the nanny cam in the corner. I sat down on the couch and turned it on, not to catch him this time, but to remind myself what truth looks like when it's captured without emotion. The screen flickered to life, showing the empty living room. I took the flash drive from the drawer, inserted it into my laptop, and transferred everything, every lie, every timestamp, every kiss he thought no one saw, into one final folder. I named it, For Cynthia. At 10:04 de la tarde, Darren came home. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that comes from work. His shirt collar was slightly creased, his hair a little messy. He smiled when he saw me. "You're still up," he said. "Yeah," I replied, closing my laptop. "Just finishing something." He kissed my forehead. "You're amazing, you know that?" I smiled, steady. "I try." He poured himself a drink, sat on the couch, and scrolled through his phone. I watched him from across the room, the same man I once loved enough to trust with everything. The difference now was invisible but absolute. He thought he still had power over me, but he didn't realize I'd already taken it back. I didn't ask where he'd been. I didn't need another lie to add to the collection. As he yawned and stretched, saying he was heading to bed, I nodded and said, "I'll join you soon." When he disappeared up the stairs, I turned off the nanny cam. Not because I was done watching, but because I no longer needed it to tell me the truth. The house went dark except for the screen of my laptop, still glowing faintly with the words, "For Cynthia." I saved the file, closed the lid, and sat back in the quiet living room. It was the same silence that had once felt unbearable. Now, it felt like the sound of readiness. The kind of silence that happens right before the storm changes direction. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter, glinting off the same coffee pot I'd used every day for years. But this time, The smell didn't bring comfort. It felt like a countdown. Darren came downstairs, still buttoning his shirt, humming a tune under his breath. His routine was so precise it could have been a script. He kissed my cheek like always, and for a fleeting second, I realized how many times I'd mistaken routine for love. When he left, I stood by the window, watching his car disappear again, same way, same time, same lie. Only this morning, I didn't feel powerless. I opened my laptop, plugged in the flash drive, and checked the folder I'd labeled for Cynthia. Every video, screenshot, and receipt was neatly arranged. I added the new hotel confirmation I'd found under Kelly's name, the final proof. Then I emailed Cynthia. Subject: ready. Message: let's move forward. Her reply came within an hour. Meet me at my office today at 2 p.m. Bring everything. Don't tell him. I got dressed carefully, dark jeans, gray sweater, nothing that looked like an ending. On the way out, I stopped by Mason's preschool to drop off snacks for his class. When he ran up to hug me, I nearly lost my composure. But I smiled and kissed his hair, whispering, "Mommy loves you so much." At Cynthia's office, she spread the documents across her desk like pieces of a map. "You've done meticulous work," she said, scanning the videos and timestamps. "He's not just cheating, he's reckless. That'll help us." I nodded, my throat dry. "I don't want to destroy him. I just don't want him to have control anymore." She looked up, her expression steady. "That's exactly what legal revenge is, taking back what's yours, without giving him the satisfaction of chaos." We went through every step. Colorado's no-fault law, asset division, custody. She walked me through what to expect, what to prepare. Her tone was calm, clinical, but her eyes were kind. "You've been living in emotional survival mode," she said. "Now it's time to live in strategy." I signed the paperwork, my name steady at the bottom of each page. It didn't feel like anger, it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. When I got home, the house was empty. Darren had texted, "Running late again, don't wait up." I didn't respond. I walked through each room, collecting the small things that were mine: old photographs, Mason's baby blanket, a few pieces of jewelry I knew he wouldn't notice missing. I packed them in a plain brown box and hid it in the trunk of my car. Then I sat down and did something I hadn't done in months. I opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote one sentence. "This is the day I stopped pretending." The words didn't feel angry. They felt clean. That night, I cooked dinner for just Mason and me. Spaghetti, his favorite. He giggled when the sauce splashed on his shirt. We ate together, laughed together. Darren's empty chair stayed empty, and for once, it didn't ache to look at it. Around 9, I put Mason to bed and came downstairs to clean up. The door opened a few minutes later, Darren's footsteps heavy, slower than usual. He looked tired, unshaven, his tie loosened. "You're still up?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "just finishing up dishes." He poured himself a drink, leaned against the counter. "Work's been hell lately." I looked at him, meeting his eyes. "I'm sure." For a second, he seemed to study me, maybe sensing something had shifted, but he said nothing more, just muttered goodnight and went upstairs. When I heard the bedroom door close, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the nanny cam footage one last time. I didn't watch it. I just hovered the cursor over the first video file, the kiss, the laugh, the betrayal. Then I dragged the entire folder into an encrypted drive and renamed it Property Documents. Cynthia had told me to stay calm, stay quiet, stay smart, and I was doing all three. Over the next few days, I began setting small traps, quiet ones. I had the locks on our bank accounts adjusted. I redirected my paycheck to the new account under my name. I backed up every photo, every bill, every email. Darren didn't notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. One evening when he was in the shower, I slipped his phone off the nightstand and went into the living room. The passcode was easy, our anniversary date. I found their messages, hundreds of them, all heart emojis and stolen promises. I forwarded them to my private email, then deleted the sent trail. When I returned his phone, I didn't feel guilt. Only confirmation. The next morning, Cynthia called. "It's ready," she said. "All we need is your signature to file." I stood by the window, watching the sun climb over the rooftops. "Let's do it," I said quietly. That day, I signed my name again. Only this time, it wasn't paperwork, it was release. When I drove home, the world looked sharper somehow. The trees, the sky, even the cracks in the pavement, everything was vivid, like the world had been holding its breath with me and was finally exhaling too. Darren's car was gone when I got back. The house was silent. I made myself tea, sat at the table, and listened to the ticking of the clock on the wall. The same house that had once felt like a prison now felt like evidence. And soon, I wouldn't have to live here at all. Outside, wind brushed against the window pane, carrying the sound of passing cars. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange calm. Not peace yet, but the start of it. Some endings don't come with noise. They begin quietly, with a document signed in ink, and a woman finally done pretending she didn't see what was right in front of her. When I woke up that morning, the air in the house felt too still. It was the quiet before a storm, not one outside, but the kind that starts in a person's chest when they've run out of patience. Darren was still asleep beside me, his face calm, peaceful, undeserving of that peace. For a long moment, I just watched him breathe. I wondered how someone could look so innocent while carrying that kind of guilt. The sunlight crept across the room, landing on the dresser on his phone, to be exact. I could see the faint glow of a notification lighting up the screen. Kelly's name again. That was it. No more pretending. I got up, walked into the kitchen, and made coffee like always. My hands didn't shake this time. I poured a second cup for him too, like it was any other morning. But my heart was steady in a way it hadn't been in months. When Darren came down, he looked tired, but still gave that same smile. "Morning," he said, grabbing his mug. I smiled back. "Morning." He took a sip and frowned. "You're up early." I had things on my mind. "Work?" I looked at him directly for the first time that morning. "Not exactly." He hesitated, confused by my tone. "Something wrong?" "Actually, yeah," I said, sliding my phone across the table toward him. The screen was already unlocked. The nanny cam footage played in silence, the living room, the kiss, the proof. He froze, his face drained of color. For a few seconds, he didn't move, didn't blink. Then, finally, his voice came out low and uncertain. "Elena, it's not what it looks like." I laughed softly, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Darren, that line is older than our marriage." He rubbed his temples, his voice quickening. "It was a mistake. I was drunk. She came on to me." I cut him off. "There were multiple mistakes, multiple nights, multiple hotels. Don't insult me by pretending this was an accident." He looked down at the table, his hands trembling slightly. "Please, just let me explain." "There's nothing left to explain. You didn't just cheat. You lied every single day for months. You looked me in the eye while tucking our son into bed, knowing what you were doing behind our backs." He started pacing, his voice rising. "You don't understand. I've been under pressure. Work's been insane." "No, Darren," I said quietly. "You've been selfish." The silence that followed was sharp, like glass breaking in slow motion. Finally, he said, "Are you going to tell Mason?" I stared at him, stunned by the question. He's 5. He doesn't need to know what kind of man his father is, not yet. His shoulders slumped. "So what now? You just leave?" I took a deep breath, steady, controlled. "No. I already filed. End of fortnight." He turned sharply, disbelief flashing across his face. "You what?" "I filed for divorce yesterday. My lawyer will contact you. You'll get everything in writing." He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You can't be serious." "I'm done, Darren." My voice was calm, almost too calm. "You don't get to decide what I forgive anymore." He sank into the chair, his hands in his hair, muttering something under his breath. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. "You're just going to throw everything away?" I felt my throat tighten, but my answer came steady. "You did that the moment you touched her." The clock ticked between us, loud and merciless. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The coffee went cold. Mason's laughter drifted faintly from upstairs, a cruel reminder that life, somehow, was still moving forward. Finally, I stood up. "You can stay here until tomorrow. I'll take Mason to my sister's for the weekend. After that, the house is mine, the papers will make it official. He didn't argue. Maybe he knew it was useless. Maybe, for the first time, he saw how far gone I really was. As I packed a small bag for Mason, I caught my reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, steady hands. I didn't see the broken woman I'd been weeks ago. I saw someone rebuilding herself, brick by quiet brick. Before leaving, I walked back into the kitchen. Darren sat there, staring at the nanny cam on the shelf, that same blinking green light that had exposed him. He looked up at me. "You really planned all this, didn't you?" I met his eyes. "No," I said softly. "You did. I just finished what you started." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg, but no words came. I picked up my keys, walked to the door, and paused only once. "You'll hear from Cynthia Hale on Monday," I said, my voice even. "She'll handle everything from here." Then I left. The morning the papers were filed, I felt a strange calm. Not relief exactly, more like quiet certainty. I had crossed the line between endurance and action, and there was no going back. I didn't tell Darren right away. The lawyer said to wait until everything was processed, to let him walk into the truth instead of announcing it. But part of me needed to look him in the eyes, not for closure, but because I wanted to see what a lie looked like when it finally met the truth. That night, I made dinner. I set the table like always, poured wine, lit a candle. There was a quiet elegance in pretending one last time. He came home late, smelling faintly of aftershave and hotel soap. He smiled when he saw the table. "Wow, what's all this?" I smiled back. "Just thought we could have a nice meal. It's been a while." "I'll." He loosened his tie and sat down. The sound of forks and glasses clinking filled the room. Mason was spending the night with my sister, and the silence between us felt heavier without his voice to soften it. After a few minutes, Darren leaned back and said, "You're quiet. Everything okay?" That was the moment, the pause I'd been waiting for. I reached into the drawer beside me and took out the flash drive. I set it on the table, right next to his plate. "This," I said softly, "is everything you've done." His smile faltered. "What is that supposed to mean?" I met his eyes. "It means I know, Darren. About Kelly, about the hotel, about the nanny cam." He froze, his jaw tightening. For a second, I thought he'd try to deny it, to spin another story. But he didn't. He just sat there, silent, staring at the small black drive like it was a loaded gun. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "Long enough," I said. He rubbed his temples, sighing. "Elena, it's not what you think." I almost laughed. "Then by all means, tell me what I'm supposed to think. Because I've watched you kiss her. I've seen the way you look at her. I've read your messages. Tell me what version of that isn't what I think it is." He looked up then, eyes pleading. "I made a mistake, okay? It wasn't supposed to happen. Things at work got stressful. And she was just there." I didn't raise my voice. "You don't trip and fall into someone's bed, Darren." His hand gripped the edge of the table. "You don't understand what it's been like lately. You've been distant, busy with Mason, with work." There it was. The script. The subtle shifting of blame. I stood up slowly, my voice steady. "You don't get to blame me for your choices. You had a partner, a wife, a family. You had everything, and you decided that wasn't enough." He stood too, his tone rising. "You don't know what it's like to feel invisible in your own home." I stared at him, almost stunned by the absurdity of it. "Invisible? You were the only person I kept seeing, even when I was exhausted. I was working double shifts, raising our son, keeping this house running while you were sneaking around pretending to be a victim." His face softened for a moment, then broke into something like regret. "Elena, I'm sorry. Please, we can fix this." I shook my head. "No, we can't." I opened the folder on the table, the one Cynthia had prepared for me, and slid a stack of papers across to him. He looked down, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. "Divorce?" he said, barely above a whisper. I nodded. "It's already filed." He stared at me for a long time. Then his voice cracked. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said simply. "And I'm not doing it because you cheated. I'm doing it because I finally realized I deserve better than waiting for you to stop. Oh. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The candle flickered between us, the sound of wax dripping onto the table, the only thing breaking the silence. Finally, he sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. What about Mason? He stays with me. You'll see him, of course, but I won't let him grow up thinking this is what love looks like. He didn't argue. Maybe he knew he had no right to. I picked up the flash drive and put it back in my pocket. You don't need to see it, I said quietly. I do. To remember what happens when I stop paying attention to myself. He didn't follow me when I turned and walked upstairs. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, the weight of everything he'd done finally catching up to him. In our bedroom, I opened the window. The night air was cool, soft, calm, nothing like the chaos that had lived inside me for months. I packed a small overnight bag for Mason and me, just enough for the weekend. I didn't plan to run. I just wanted space, air, distance. As I zipped the bag, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd once ignored her instincts. Her eyes were clearer now. Downstairs, I could still hear the faint clink of glass, Darren pouring another drink, maybe trying to numb what couldn't be undone. I turned off the bedroom light, stood for a moment in the dark, and listened to the quiet hum of the house. The same walls that had witnessed everything were finally on my side. When I walked back down the stairs, he didn't look up. I placed my car keys on the counter, paused by the door, and said, "You can stay here tonight. I'll take Mason to my sister's." He didn't answer. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin. For the first time in months, I felt the ground under my feet and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. There was no dramatic ending, no shouting, no broken plates. Just truth plain and sharp sitting in the quiet between us. And for the first time, that quiet felt like freedom. The morning after I confronted Darren, the house felt strangely still. Not empty, just quiet in a way that felt different. I had expected to wake up with that familiar pit in my stomach, but instead, there was something else. Space. I drove Mason to my sister's place. He sat in the back seat humming to himself, his small voice filling the silence that had lived inside me for months. When we pulled up to the driveway, he ran out to greet his cousins, laughter trailing behind him. My sister, Renee, gave me a long hug at the door, the kind that doesn't need words. "You finally did it," she said softly. "I did," I whispered back. Her eyes were warm but sad. "You okay?" I exhaled. "I think I will be." She didn't press further. Instead, she offered me coffee and told me to stay as long as I needed. That night, I slept in her guest room, a small space with faded curtains and a quilt that smelled like lavender. I slept through the night for the first time in months. When I woke up, the sun was already high. My phone buzzed a text from Darren. "We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "There's nothing left to talk about. Have." Then I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and went to make breakfast with Renee. By the third day, news had already started to spread. Mutual friends, coworkers, neighbors, the quiet gossip that fills the spaces between polite smiles. Darren's perfect image was cracking faster than he could patch it. I hadn't planned for what happened next. Karma did that part for me. Cynthia called one afternoon while Mason napped. "You might want to sit down," she said. "It's about your husband's job." I sat on the edge of the couch, bracing myself. She continued. "Apparently, his company's HR department got an anonymous tip about inappropriate conduct with a subordinate. They found out about the affair with Kelly. He's been placed on leave pending investigation." For a moment, I didn't say anything. Just silence, that same stillness that had filled my home days ago. Then I asked quietly, "Do you think it was Kelly who reported it?" Cynthia hesitated. "Does it matter?" "No, it didn't. Karma doesn't need a name." Later that evening, Darren showed up at my sister's doorstep. He looked worn, shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes, the confident manager now replaced by a man unraveling. "Elena, please," he said, his voice breaking. "Can we just talk?" I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "There's nothing left to talk about, Darren. I lost my job," he blurted out. Someone told HR about Kelly. They're investigating everything. I could lose my benefits, my reputation. He stopped when he saw my face. There was no pity there, only quiet clarity. You're worried about your reputation? I said softly. You should have worried about your family. He ran a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. Kelly, she's saying things that aren't true, that I manipulated her, that... I cut him off. I'm not your audience anymore, Darren. Not your wife, not your excuse. I'm Steve. He looked at me, like he didn't recognize me. Like the woman standing in front of him wasn't the same one who used to make him coffee every morning. He wasn't wrong. I made a mistake, he whispered. No, I said, calm and even. You made a series of choices. For a long moment, we stood there in silence. The wind rustled through the trees, the faint sound of kids playing in the backyard drifting over us. Finally, he said, I don't know how to fix it. You don't, I replied. You just live with it. He lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know, but sorry doesn't unring a bell. He left after that, his shoulders slumped, the sound of his car fading down the street. I went back inside, closing the door quietly behind me. Renee was at the kitchen table, sipping tea, her eyes searching mine. That was him, wasn't it? I nodded. She smiled faintly. Good. You looked calm. I am, I said, and I meant it. A week later, I got a call from Cynthia again. It's official, she said. The company terminated both Darren and Kelly. Their internal investigation found multiple policy violations. You won't need to do anything more on that front. I thanked her, then sat there for a long time after hanging up. The strange thing about karma is that it doesn't always come with noise or justice served in dramatic fashion. Sometimes it's just consequences quietly finding their way home. That night, I went outside and sat on the porch. The air smelled like rain, the kind of scent that feels like cleansing. I watched the sky darken and thought about how everything that once broke me had now rearranged itself into something stronger. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. There was no need. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's just watching someone face what they tried to run from and realizing you no longer need to lift a finger. When I went back inside, Mason was sitting on the couch, wrapped in his blanket, half asleep. I brushed his hair back and whispered, Mommy's here. He smiled in his sleep, his little hand reaching out to hold mine. In that moment, I felt something shift. Not relief, but peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but from letting go. Outside, thunder rumbled softly in the distance. The air felt alive, charged, waiting to break into rain. I turned off the lights, stood at the window, and watched the first drops hit the glass slow, steady, certain. The storm didn't scare me anymore. It just sounded like the truth, coming full circle. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, sterile, quiet, almost peaceful. I'd imagined this moment 100 different ways, but when it finally came, it wasn't anger I felt. It was release. Cynthia met me outside the courtroom, a soft smile replacing her usual professionalism. You ready? She asked. I nodded. More than I thought I'd ever be. We walked inside together. Darren was already seated at the table across from mine, his suit pressed but his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who'd finally run out of lies to stand behind. When the judge entered, everything moved quickly, procedural, straightforward, emotionless. The marriage of 12 years, reduced to signatures and legal phrasing. Petitioner, Elena Brooks. Respondent, Darren Brooks. When my name was called, I rose. My voice didn't shake as I answered the standard questions. Yes, I understood the terms. Yes, I wished to proceed. Yes, this was my decision. Darren didn't say much. He just stared at the table, his wedding band still on his hand, a ring that meant nothing now. When it was over, the judge nodded politely. Divorce is granted. Oh? The gavel's tap was soft, but the sound felt like a full stop, not a door slamming shut, just one gently closing behind me. Outside, I stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, the autumn air cool against my face. Cynthia put a hand on my shoulder. You did well, she said. I smiled faintly. It didn't feel like winning. It isn't about winning, she said. It's about walking away, standing. I thanked her, hugged her goodbye, and walked to my car. On the drive home, I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. The world looked sharper, the mountains on the horizon, the steady rhythm of passing cars, the pale gold leaves trembling in the breeze. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. Not haunted anymore, just still. I stood at the door for a moment before going in, taking a breath like I was stepping into a new version of my life. Inside, Mason was at the table drawing, crayons scattered everywhere. He looked up when he saw me. "Hi, Mommy, I made a rocket." I smiled, kneeling beside him. "That's amazing, sweetheart." He grinned, proud. "Can we hang it on the fridge?" "Of course we can," I said. It was such an ordinary exchange, yet it felt like everything I'd been fighting for, this small moment of normalcy, safe and untainted. Later that night, when Mason was asleep, I walked through the house room by room, light by light. Every corner carried a memory. The first birthday party, the Christmas mornings, the arguments, the laughter that used to fill these walls. But instead of sadness, I felt something like gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons. Gratitude for the strength I didn't know I had. On the kitchen counter sat a small stack of mail. One envelope stood out, official, crisp. Inside was the final decree of divorce, embossed with the court seal. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but closure. A few days later, I met Darren at the park. He'd asked to see Mason, and I'd agreed. It was a clear afternoon, children playing, leaves rustling, the sky an endless blue. He waved when he saw us, his expression uncertain. Mason ran to him, laughing, and Darren lifted him up, spinning him once before setting him down. For a moment, I saw the father, not the man who betrayed me. When Mason ran off to the swings, Darren turned to me. "You look good," he said quietly. "I feel good," I replied. He nodded, eyes soft. "I'm sorry for everything, Elena. I mean it." "I know," I said. "But it's not my job to carry your sorry anymore." He looked down, exhaling slowly. "I'm glad you're doing okay." "I am," I said simply. "And I hope someday you are too." He nodded again, a faint, sad smile tugging at his lips. "You always were the stronger one." I didn't correct him. There was no need. When Mason called out for me, I waved and walked over, helping him onto the swing. The air smelled of pine and sunlight. I could hear Darren's footsteps fading as he walked back to his car. Mason kicked his legs, laughing as the swing rose higher. "Push me, Mommy." I smiled, giving him a gentle push. "Hold on tight." His laughter filled the air light, unbroken, honest. And for the first time, I didn't feel the shadow of what had happened behind us. Just this moment, simple and alive. That evening, I packed up a few more things, not because I was running, but because I was ready to move forward. I'd found a small townhouse closer to work, with sunlight in every room and a little garden where Mason could play. It wasn't the life I'd imagined years ago, but it was mine, fully and freely. Before bed, I sat by the window, watching the last bit of daylight fade over the mountains. The world outside was calm. Inside, it was even quieter. I thought about the word freedom, how it's not loud or dramatic. It's just the ability to breathe without fear, to wake up and not dread the day ahead, to look in the mirror and recognize yourself again. Down the hall, Mason murmured in his sleep, and I smiled to myself. The papers were signed, the lies were gone, and the house, our house, finally belonged to peace. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of laughter from somewhere down the street. It wasn't ours, but that didn't matter. I didn't need to chase happiness anymore. It had found me right where I was, quiet, steady, and completely free. It's strange how a year can pass and still feel like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Sometimes, I catch myself standing at the kitchen counter, waiting for the coffee to brew, and realize I'm not holding my breath anymore. The silence that used to feel like punishment now feels like peace. Mason's laughter echoes through the townhouse as I tie his shoes before school. "Hurry, Mommy, we're gonna be late," he says, his voice full of that same boundless energy that saved me on the hardest days. He doesn't remember the fights, the tension, the nights I cried quietly in the bathroom. For him, life is just normal now, and that's all I ever wanted. After dropping him off, I drive to work. The roads in Boulder are lined with golden leaves, and for the first time in years, I notice how beautiful this town really is. The mountains look softer somehow, or maybe I've just learned how to see again. At the hospital, my coworkers greet me with warm smiles. I still work in accounting, same desk, same routine, but I walk differently now, shoulders back, head high, no longer shrinking myself to make someone else feel comfortable. When you've survived being broken by someone you trusted most, you stop apologizing for taking up space. At lunch, Tanya joins me in the break room. "You look lighter," she says, sipping her coffee. "I feel lighter, I admit." She grins. "That new haircut helps too." We laugh real laughter, not the polite kind that hides exhaustion. Tanya leans in, lowering her voice. "So, have you heard from him?" I shake my head. "Not in months. Just emails about Mason's schedule. He's keeping his distance." "And Kelly?" I shrug. "Last I heard, she moved to Denver. Different company. Guess karma doesn't like to stay still." Tanya smiles knowingly. "Good. You don't need to keep looking back." "I'm not," I say softly. "I think that's the point." That evening, I pick Mason up from aftercare. He runs to me, backpack bouncing, eyes bright. "Mom, I drew something for you," he says, handing me a crayon picture. It's of the two of us holding hands under a big yellow sundae. I crouch down to his level. "That's beautiful, baby. Where's Daddy?" He pauses, thinking, then says, "He's not in this one. This one's just us." Something about that hits me, not sadness, but clarity. Kids draw what they see, what feels safe, what's real. For Mason, his world had rebuilt itself, small and steady, around the people who stayed. We stop for ice cream on the way home. He picks mint chocolate chip, like always, and I take vanilla. He tells me about his day, about a science project, and a kid named Leo who brought a frog to class. I listen to every word. I used to be too distracted for that, always thinking about who Darren was texting, what lie I'd have to swallow next. But now, I'm fully there. That night, after putting Mason to bed, I sit by the window with a glass of tea. The house is quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. I look out at the street below, porch lights glowing, neighbors walking dogs, the slow rhythm of ordinary life. It's beautiful in its simplicity. My phone buzzes on the counter. An email notification. From Darren Brooks. For a moment, I just stare at it. Then I open it. Subject: I'm sorry. Elena, I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, not the kind of sorry that fixes anything, but the kind that admits I ruined something good. I've been going to therapy. I've realized things I should have known long ago. I miss our son. I'm grateful you're giving him stability. I hope you're okay. Darren? I read it twice. There's no anger, no tears, just an odd, quiet acceptance. Maybe this is what forgiveness really feels like. Not reconciliation, not forgetting, but the ability to read someone's regret and not let it reopen your wounds. I close the email, delete it, and pour myself another cup of tea. I don't need his words to validate my peace. I already have it. The next morning, the first snow of the season arrives. Mason stands by the window, his breath fogging the glass. It's snowing, Mommy. Can we go outside? After breakfast, I tell him, smiling. Go get your boots. He runs off, and I watch the flakes drift down slow, silent, steady. A year ago, I was watching another kind of storm, the one inside me. But this one feels gentle, cleansing. Later, as we step outside, Mason throws the first handful of snow into the air, laughing. It lands on his hair, his eyelashes, the ground beneath us. He looks up, face glowing. It's like the world's brand new, he says. I laugh softly. Maybe it is. We build a small snowman together in the yard. I watch him work, focused, determined, innocent. And as I stand there, surrounded by white and silence, I realize that peace doesn't come when everything's fixed. It comes when you stop needing to fix what's already behind you. When the sun finally breaks through the clouds, It glints off the snow, warm and bright. Mason claps his hands. "He's done," he says proudly, pointing at our slightly lopsided snowman. "He's perfect," I reply. And maybe that's the truth of it all. Life doesn't need to be perfect to feel whole. It just needs to be honest the way a scar is honest, the way light hits after a long winter. I take a deep breath, the air crisp and clean, and feel the warmth of something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, but contentment. The kind that doesn't ask for more. The kind that says, quietly, you made it. It's funny how the things that once broke you can one day make you feel whole again. I used to think revenge meant watching him suffer, losing his job, his reputation, his comfort, but that was before I learned what real revenge looked like. It wasn't destruction. It was peace. It's been over a year since the divorce. The townhouse is still small, but it's ours warm, filled with Mason's drawings taped unevenly on the fridge and the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings. The chaos of motherhood still exists, but it's a kind of chaos I welcome now. It's real. It's mine. Sometimes when I walk through the house, I catch my reflection in a mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Not because I've changed beyond recognition, but because she looks calm. Her eyes don't carry the quiet fear they once did. She's free. On Sunday mornings, Mason and I have a ritual. We walk to the park with a thermos of hot chocolate, sit on the same bench near the pond, and feed the ducks. He always counts them out loud, his little voice echoing across the water. 1, 2, 3. They're all friends now, Mommy. Every time he says that, something inside me softens. I spent so long focusing on what was lost that I almost forgot how much could still be found. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out the hall closet, I found the old Nanny cam tucked away in a box. I hadn't seen it since the day I moved out of the old house. For a second, I just stared at it, that small black device that once changed everything. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was strange to think about how such a tiny thing could hold so much truth, so much pain. But as I stood there, I realized it didn't hurt anymore. The camera hadn't ruined my life. It had revealed it. I plugged it in out of curiosity, not to see old footage, but to check if it even worked. The green light blinked once, steady and bright, alive. I smiled faintly, then unplugged it again, and placed it back in the box. Some things don't need to be erased or thrown away. They just need to be put to rest. That evening, after Mason fell asleep, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The neighborhood was quiet, crickets humming, porch lights glowing, a soft breeze moving through the trees. I thought about Darren for the first time in months. Not with anger or bitterness, but with an odd kind of neutrality. He had reached out once more, around Christmas, asking if we could meet, to talk things through. I told him there was nothing left to talk about. He didn't argue. Since then, he's kept his distance, visiting Mason on weekends, doing what he's supposed to do, and that's enough. I've stopped wondering whether he regrets what he did. I don't need that answer anymore. People either live with their choices or they learn from them. Either way, it's no longer my burden to carry. Peace didn't come suddenly. It came in layers, in small, steady moments. The mornings when I woke up and realized I hadn't checked my phone in panic. The evenings when I could sit alone in the quiet without feeling lonely. The laughter that returned to the house, unforced and pure. Some nights, I still wake up to the sound of rain on the roof. For a second, the memories try to return the image of him walking through the door with someone else's scent on his shirt, the green light blinking on the shelf, the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. But then I breathe. The rain isn't the same. The house isn't the same. And neither am I. I've learned that revenge doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes it's as soft as silence. Sometimes it's walking away without needing to slam the door. A few weeks ago, Tanya invited me to a small dinner with some friends. I almost said no, I'd gotten so used to solitude. But I went anyway. The restaurant was cozy, the kind with candles on every table and a slow hum of laughter in the background. That's where I met Chris, a friend of a friend, gentle eyes, easy smile. He didn't ask about my past. He asked about my favorite book, my son, my dreams. The kind of questions that see you as a person, not a story. We've gone for coffee a few times since. Nothing serious yet, just simple, easy company. I don't know where it will lead, and for the first time in my life, I don't need to know. I'm not searching for someone to complete me. I already did that myself. When I tucked Mason into bed tonight, he looked up at me sleepily and said, "Mommy, you're happy now." How? I smiled. "Yeah, baby. I am. Even without Daddy?" "Yes," I whispered, brushing his hair back. "Even without Daddy." He nodded, satisfied, and closed his eyes. His breathing evened out, soft and steady, and I sat there for a while just watching him. After he fell asleep, I went back to the porch. The moon hung low, bright and quiet. The world was still, and for once, my mind was too. I thought about that first morning, the one where the air felt too still, where his words shattered everything I thought I knew. "I regret marrying you." Back then, I believed that was the beginning of my end. Now I know it was the start of something else entirely, the moment I stopped living for someone else's comfort and started living for my own peace. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the night breeze wash over me. Peace doesn't demand attention. It doesn't scream or prove anything. It just settles quietly, filling all the spaces that used to ache. And as I sat there, in the same stillness that once broke me, I finally understood this was my revenge. Not pain, not loss, just peace, steady, quiet, and completely mine. If you've ever been there, if you've ever loved someone who made you question your worth, I hope my story reminds you that you can start over. You can lose everything and still find yourself. And sometimes, what feels like an ending is just life turning you towards something better. Thank you for listening to my story. If you connect with emotional family revenge stories, real revenge stories, or heartfelt family drama that reminds you how strong people can be, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me share more stories like this one, stories about truth, healing, and the kind of quiet courage that changes everything. Tell me in the comments, what does peace mean to you?